Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Brave Briefings, where brave men and women share either their stories or their tips on living a safe and peaceful life devoid of harassment, toxic masculinity, sexual or gender based violence. So, are you brave? Are you brave, Sue?
I like to think so.
Well, I am Lois, your friend for forgiveness from Walking Without Skin. And Sue thinks she's brave. I think she's very brave. And I'd like to welcome Sue Carr to the show. Hi, Sue.
Thanks very much, Lois. Thanks for having me. Firstly,
Thank you for joining
I'm
us.
all pleasure. I'm always happy to share the message of uh, bravery in terms of having the courage to be ourselves, if you like. I think that's probably one of the bravest stances that most of us can take, especially ladies in this world today. But yeah, so I am indeed Sue Curr. I hail from the UK. I'm a mental well-being mindset specialist these days, NLP practitioner and speaker, which sounds quite glamorous, but trust me, it's not. and and these days, I help what I term to be the professional swans of this world, those amongst us who give the impression that they're gliding serenely through life as though they don't have a care in the world, and yet underneath they're paddling like crazy just to stay afloat for fear of being seen to be vulnerable, lacking in some way, a failure, God forbid, particularly in the view of what they perceive others to see them like. So it's an interesting journey and one that every single day brings new challenges, both for the people that I work with and myself, along that road. Because I think um, we're all warriors inside, but some of us need it teasing out more than others, shall we say?
Now, we're all wearing masks, even though we have to wear masks today. We're talking about the
Yes,
metaphorical masks.
absolutely,
so,
absolutely.
so
It's a crazy world we live in at the minute, isn't it?
it is. And you help people take off those masks.
Take off the masks, have the courage to stand up and allow the world to see them for who and what they really are, which can be a very, very scary place. Um, but for me, in all of that, being brave, uh, if we are individually, each of us, brave, for me, we would be best advised. The acronym that I use for the word brave is be realistic in assessing the value of everyone in our lives.
Oh, I like that. Say that again.
Be realistic in assessing the value of everyone in our lives. BRAVE.
Excellent. I
And
love that.
and if we can use that as a yardstick, it then moves fairly easily into into a point where we automatically, without being rude or mean or anything like that, we can sort of very quickly come to gauge a person's worth, not their worth in terms of what they think about themselves, but our worth in terms of what we perceive they can bring to our lives when it comes to value. Now, value is a loaded word because I don't mean anything monetary in that sense, or anything fiscal or material, but the value that they can bring to us in terms of unconditional love, for argument's sake, or being supportive, or being empathic, or being just generally there for us in our lives and us for them, incidentally, because we can. Now that's applicable to both men and women, and I think for many women particularly, perhaps the men in their lives don't actually fit the above criteria. But this is not a one size fits all game. We have to be malleable in that, and assess, literally going back to the A, to assess each situation as it occurs. um, and in the mix of all that, the thing that I found very early on in this part of my life, because pre 8 years ago, I didn't assess anything, even myself, to be fair. And I certainly didn't, I was happy to have anybody in my life who I thought were friends. If we take sort of the immediate family out of the equation, and I would say yes when no would suffice, and I would dance to the tune that anybody else was playing on their fiddle, not mine. And it got me into a lot of trouble. So these days, I'm a little bit more um, aware of the fact that actually, if we're not very careful, we will end up living our lives to the agenda of what somebody else would have for us. rather than the life that we were actually gifted to live in our own way and on our own terms. And enforcing our personal boundaries within that is key. It's absolutely key. And personal boundaries for me, I don't know about yourself, but I would describe a personal boundary as being the minimum standard that we are willing to accept from anybody else with regard to how they speak to us, treat us, talk about us to other people, etc., etc., etc. If we wouldn't do or stoop to the level that they are, then that comes back to being, you know, brave enough to assess the value that they bring. And it can be very difficult. It can be a really difficult choice, because sometimes we have to make that choice to step away from people who we think should love us for just because we're us. Some people actually aren't capable of doing that, in my experience, sadly.
Wow, you've unpacked a lot there. I think we might have another discussion. But you used the word empathic at one point.
Mm.
How do we become empathic? Can we improve our empathy?
It's a skill set for sure. I think there are a few people, a few types of people on the planet who are not wired up, without wanting to be rude, in terms of the ability to be empathic. So for instance, you know, if you are on the autistic spectrum as an adult particularly, you are far less likely to be able to evidence empathy. You know, if you because purely because the emotional anchor isn't there. It doesn't mean they don't care, it just means they can't see themselves in your situation, and therefore they can't reflect it back to you, if that makes sense. But I think I have a saying also which goes along the lines of everything begins and ends with you. And I think if we are very self-aware as human beings, we know what our shortcomings are. I know that I can be quite impatient, shall we say, at times, and that's something that I work very hard to try and correct. It's difficult to understand if you're not empathic, because if you genuinely can't see another person's slant on a story, then how can you possibly identify with it enough to support them in that? We can support people. We can put a loving arm around their shoulder, tell them everything will be all right. But unless we truly understand what they're going through, it's very difficult to reflect empathically back to them. And we often fall then into the realms of appearing to be judgmental or unsupportive or any other. It depends on the situation, and it depends on the person who is in need of our empathy, how they interpret our responses, obviously. So it's a bit of a nightmare, it's a bit of a minefield. But I firmly believe that if there isn't an actual block to prevent us from learning anything, then I would answer yes. But you have to be able and open to and accepting of the fact that you may need to learn how to do it in a way that is beneficial not only to yourself but to other people as well. Sort of, it's a selfless act, if you like, to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and be able to support them in the way that they want, not the way that you want to support them. So it's often very different.
And then, of course, you spoke about the value of other people,
Yeah,
and how you value them. But unless you understand, if you have that self awareness and understand your own values, how can you value the other person?
absolutely. If we, particularly women, I think, although increasingly I think more men are sort of crawling out from underneath the woodwork and allowing themselves to be seen to be vulnerable, but primarily, certainly in my experience in the UK at least, women still are very down on themselves. They're very inclined to put other people first. They're very inclined to say yes to something when no would be far more sensible in terms of meeting their own needs. And when we fall into the realms of relationships that are toxic or demanding or narcissistic, or if we happen to move in with a gaslighter, for instance, and I don't mean somebody that, you know, I'm not talking about a match here, but the people who have hidden agendas for our lives, and yet they convince us that it's our agenda in the first place. These are the people that I mean in terms of being realistic in assessing their value. What value do they bring to our lives? Not the big house, not the flash car, not the foreign holidays. That's just stuff. That's stuff. Everything else, what I call the intangibles of life for me, are where our real wealth lies. integrity, honest, trust, unconditional love, and yes, empathy. They're the real valuable assets in everybody's life.
So
I
how do we encourage people to develop these assets, especially those who are currently in with a toxic personality?
Self-care. I have a 5-pointer that I sort of lead people down the road of. We all have fiscal bank accounts, right? We all have the bank accounts. It doesn't matter how many notes there are in the bank accounts, in the black or in the red. When it comes to our money, we're going to shuffle off this planet the same way we arrived, naked and penniless with just a few more wrinkles. It's as simple as that. Yeah. But during our lifetime, we can massage the bank balance, the actual money in the bank. We can massage it. If we run out of money, we can slap it on a credit card, or if you've got a nice bank manager, we can have an overdraft and all that sort of stuff. We can massage it to make it fit. When it comes down to the individual, I term that we, all of us as humans, have 5 separate yet interdependent bank accounts that when we fit them together perfectly, or as perfectly as we can, they serve to provide a foundation upon which we can then make better, more informed, positive choices for ourselves. And they quite simply are our physical, emotional, mental, social, and spiritual selves. These 5 accounts that we each of us have within us, our 5 senses of self, if you like, if we can keep all of those topped up daily and in the black, we're far less likely to drop into the red. And if we drop into the red in any one of them, it's rare that we drop into the red, say, just in our physical self, because if our physical self is too tired, not getting enough sleep, it's going to drag down our emotional self because we tend to be more tearful and all the rest of it. So we very quickly see all the 5 bank accounts dropping down into the red. When that happens, our sense of judgment goes out the window, our sense of being enough goes out the window, and it creates all manner of stuff which very rapidly leads us down the road of stress, overwhelm, and burnout, and rationality, particularly when we come into to view the relationships that we're in. It goes along with it. When we can practice self-care in those 5 areas every single day as a non-negotiable part of our personal boundaries, we creep very slowly back up into the black, and once we're there, then we have a rock solid foundation upon which we can make the decisions which will possibly change our lives for the better forever. If we make those same decisions whilst we're in the red, it would be in the realms of making decisions for decision's sake or out of need and desperation. And we may well end up staying with a partner who actually long ago ceased to serve us on any level, let alone add any value to our lives. So self-care for me on that 5-pronged wheel, if you like, that 5-spoke wheel, is the vital starting point for everybody.
Sure, there's a lot in there. So, Sue, I'm going to put your contact details below this video if anybody wants to contact Sue to take this
Sure.
discussion further. That's fantastic. So we need to make sure that people stay in the black in all of their bank accounts, so that we can
Absolutely.
go forward in a brave manner. So thank you for sharing that with
My
us.
pleasure. My
So,
pleasure.
everybody, you too can be brave, and let's together fight the scourge, fight the silent pandemic that is impacting the world. And you can contact Sue, you can contact me at Walking Without Skin. So, do join us, be bold, be brave, and fly free. So, thank you very much, Sue, for joining us today.
My
And
pleasure.
go well. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.